Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BC, and you know everything. Pew, pew, pew. Third time is a charm. We've got the right microphone. We're wearing headphones because of the excessive amount of construction going on. It's actually a fun little segue into what this episode is going to be about. Before we do that, I just want to remind you, welcome if this is your first time listening, apologies in advance. But if you've been here before, I'm starting to tease out some concepts that I've done a very deep dive into in a big old book, because I talk a lot about the future of business, Business 3.0, the 21st century landscape of entrepreneurship and creativity and technology very much. These are all, what's it referred to as? Special interests of mine, but also I've kind of built, the last 25 years of my professional life on top of these obsessions. And this morning I woke up very early because sleeping is a challenge. Unless I sauna cold plunge, that's become my newest hack. So if any of you out there listening want to get me a sauna and a cold plunge set up, I would love that. But I digress. I woke up this morning, in a bit of a tizzy, as I sometimes do, and realized I was just absolutely spinning my wheels. I was freaking out about all the world's problems, including my own personal problems, which pale in comparison. And this little train of thought, which is a very recognizable, very ingrained patterned thought cycle of mine, some might call it a loop, helped me remember, this is what we do. This doesn't make it real. And more importantly, this doesn't make it productive. I've had some wildly unpredictable things occur over the last few years. I'm sure you can relate. And it doesn't matter how much risk analysis I did or how much money I had in my savings account, to the point where that level of security would have almost been wasteful. I've still been, absolutely knocked sideways. And it really forced me to lean into this concept of predictability. And I've been talking a little bit about it in the loop that I put out this week. And I did this episode, I wrote these notes out a few weeks ago, but they're really based on this book that I've been writing over the last year. And what I want to talk about is not the obvious security we find in predictable patterns. That shows up for us very often as work, because work is typically where we exchange value for time and energy. And in that, we derive security. We get paid, right? And believe me, I'm not going to talk about the golden handcuffs or how a paycheck pretends to be security. Those are very old, arguments, debates. I'm bored as fuck by them. But what I do want to talk about is the thing under the thing. And that's the intention behind this book, Business 3.0, The Future of Business, Building in the 21st Century, is how did we get here? Because, okay, I am going to repeat something pretty obvious. If it were just money, or if it were just the paycheck, you wouldn't be worried about anything. But I bet you are, regardless of if you're an entrepreneur, an artist, a creative, launching, closing, wherever you might be in your own work, your own business, whatever it is that you take seriously enough to invest in, to create within, to put yourself out there, to give it a good old-fashioned go. Why you're listening to this podcast, I would imagine. We still find ourselves feeling almost out of control with the uncertainty of what will happen next. And, this morning I realized I've recorded this now several times, so forgive me if I'm literally repeating myself in this same episode, but the worrying doesn't solve any of the problems. It sure as shit doesn't get anything done at 4:00 in the morning. It is a pattern. And we find patterns so deliciously reassuring because they're so familiar, these routines, these ruts that are so well traveled. And that's predictable, right? So something else I'm not going to do in this episode is pretend like money doesn't matter, because rent, groceries, childcare, healthcare, material reality matters. it's like incredibly influential. And we do derive a lot of our security, a lot of our tangible physical structure and support in this 3D material experience we all get to live. There's a reason why our jobs started to feel like our source of security through this predictable paycheck. And I would also like to add, the other things that became predictable were these power struggles, these conditional yet coveted agreements that if I show up and work every day, I get security in return. But that's completely revocable on their terms, depending on what mood they're in, depending on what shareholders demand next quarter, depending how the market swings, depending on which executive gets plopped in for 1 to 3 years, depending on whatever gajillion-dollar contract they have. And so this quarterly panic actually becomes the predictable pattern. And I don't care how much you're getting paid, it ain't worth it. What I want and what I hope to shed a light upon today is like that thing under the thing. Why did we all sign up for this? Why do we continue to seek this out? The amount of times when I've felt like, okay, this whole like entrepreneurship business thing, multi-passionate brouhaha is like fun, but some security would be cool too. Like knowing how I'm going to get it all done next week or how I'm going to pay for it all next month should feel good, right? And I go look at job listings. What? That programming runs deep, but we all know money isn't what makes us feel safe. Sure, it solves some problems, doesn't solve all. Access can feel like safety, but if it all can vanish at any given time because of some decision made in a boardroom with a door that is closed to you, why do we think we find our security through work? And I believe in what I'm sort of discussing in this book, and one of the biggest hurdles we will all have in this future of business is that our security comes from within. And the thesis I'm going to present you with today, and hopefully back the fuck up, is that we are able to provide a much more consistent sense of safety and security to ourselves, all by ourselves, when we withdraw our need for that external validation. And when we understand what they told us was the right way to be, and therefore the best way to think and show up and perform, broke our ability to self-resource, which is why we're so codependent and enmeshed in the system. This is why we've seen the dissolution, the dissolving, the breakup of like unions, 401k plans, like benefits. What happens is when workers get more productive, they actually become less protected, which is counterintuitive. And so this is where it's like we've moved out of this sort of codependency into like a fully emotional abusive situation where we've been trained to believe our output defines our value, and value should equate to security, because the more we're worth, the more secure we should be. And again, we just continue to prove that false over and over and over again. Worker compensation has been in sharp decline since the late 70s, and productivity has been a parabolic increase. We make more, we build more, we optimize more, but we don't get anything more. Why do we keep signing up for this? It's like abusive. I mean, if your friend described a relationship that they were in like that to you, you would be like, you need to get the fuck out. You probably need to get some therapy. You might need to move, like cut your losses, start over. So yeah, the paycheck was like the first, it was the emotional anesthesia that numbed us to the point where they could really start getting us to perform at this certain level in exchange for what they told us would feel good. A predictable paycheck soothes something very real. A repeating pattern lowers cognitive load. It gives shape to time. It gives your brain a sense that tomorrow can be planned, and planning feels like relief. Research on uncertainty and anxiety has shown that uncertain threat is especially destabilizing because it disrupts our ability to prepare or protect ourselves, which means the body often prefers a known problem over an unknown one. But here's the paradox. Here's the catch-22. When we have space, because we are not overburdened by their unrealistic expectations and unrewarded job descriptions, we are able to problem solve. We are able to be creative. Creativity does not come from being too busy or too secure. Creativity lives on that knife's edge of uncertain and space. So when a job says, here's your schedule, here are your deadlines, here are your deliverables, here's the salary band, here are your benefits, and here's your performance review calendar, we interpret that as a step-by-step pathway to our gold star. Your nervous system will absolutely register that as a form of safety, but not because it's safe, because it's predictable, it's planned, it's legible. And that's the rub, that's the grift, that's the con. What we start to internalize is that this pattern repeating feels like protection because our nervous system interprets that certainty, that predictability as relief. That's a physical experience we have labeled as safety. Yet, I don't know that anyone would describe their current job or work as anything remotely secure in this moment. And so this is why we stay so emotionally attached to our jobs, spiritually attached, materially attached, even though it's beating our ass. It's not just the paycheck. And it's not just this patterning and this planning. It's an acute response to trauma. And just like all triggers, until we get to the root of that issue, it will continue to provoke us into these situations that keep us inherently unsafe when all we're trying to be is safe. It's very, very tricky and nuanced. And the thing is your triggering is going to be different than mine, but it is all just a pattern. And when we can get to the root of the issue, it usually derives from a place a long, long time ago where we were under-resourced. We were not able to take care of ourselves. And in our present moment, if we go back to that learning, we can understand it wasn't money that we needed or a job title or even a gold star. It was probably just a hug or maybe space to recuperate. And I understand that our adult problems probably need more resourcing than just some tenderness and patience. And our adult problems are really complex. With tenderness and patience, they always work themselves out. And when I look at myself this morning, scanning hysterically for problems, the only way I get clarity is if I look back with that 2020 hindsight and I go, holy shit, you've actually survived life-threatening situations, extended life-threatening situations that were labeled as terminal. So you have way more proof that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay all by yourself without actually any external resources. So why do you keep looking for a problem and then suggesting you won't be able to fix it because of things that are out of your control? That's the only fallacy thus far in this thesis. The reason that looking for evidence is so important is your aforementioned material reality. So the uncertainty is literally what we don't know. we hate that. That's why the planning and the predictability feels like such a relief. So then the homework becomes, how do you relax? How do you find that calm, that resolve, that patience in the uncertainty? I've talked ad nauseum about this, but it becomes incredibly important when we start building for the future right now, because we continue to construct support and systems that look like the old way. The number one reason my clients struggle, especially when they come out of corporate and go into self-employment, is the regular payment frequency. Sending an invoice does not mean it's paid. And I'm not going to get into the kind of like nuances of that, but what freaks them out is the fact that they cannot predict the income at regular intervals. It doesn't matter if they're charging 10 times as much, but it's not the money, it's the unknown that spins them out. And then they start making decisions in that level 1, 2 place. And then they call me. So let's look at some other realities. Okay. I was raised in a world where you had a career. You developed an expertise, and then you did that for the majority of your professional life. I remember when I got my first job, working in the food industry and service industry, like many of us, my parents were like, be careful, because your first job, that could be it. That could be the rest of your life. That wasn't technically my second or third. I had a handful of food industry jobs, but I would say, my first career was in music. And that absolutely was I answered a newspaper ad, and then 20 years later, I've completed that style of work. So they weren't wrong. But now the median tenure for private sector workers is 3.5 years, not 35, 3.5. The fantasy is over. This predictability, this certainty you received in exchange for your soul, in exchange for your work, for your time and energy, it's gone. But I have conversations with people, teenagers, and people say, well, what do you want to major in college? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Like a 17-year-old should have an answer for that. And we expect them to. This is changing for sure, but not as quickly as I thought it would. People still talk about finding a stable job. People still want and fantasize about this relationship between worker and employer. And they talk about it like it's till death do us part. I mean, we still talk about retirement. And retirement used to be defined as a benefit plan. If you work for us for X amount of years, you will get Y from us in exchange for those amount of years. Now, up to 70% of corporate jobs had a pension. It shifted to a matching amount, sliding, percentages of dollars were matched based on how much you put into your retirement account. But that promise has dissolved. No longer is that we'll carry some long-term risk with you if you are willing to risk with us. Now it's like you get nothing and like it, but we still approach our work like it is our sanctuary and our security and our promise of a better future. So this is a huge ideological break I'm asking you to make. What I'm suggesting is that what used to be framed as collective or employer-backed security has slowly shifted all of that onus onto you, the individual, whether you're an employee or an entrepreneur. You manage the volatility of the markets. You manage your own retirement. You pray at the altar of compound returns. You are in charge of your own benefits, your own risks, and analyzing. How many of you had to switch healthcare funds every year since 2020? I got my hand up. And most of you probably won't even know what unions are. In 2024, union membership was down to under 10%. In the 80s, 1 in 5 workers was member of a union. and this isn't me being nostalgic, unions offered a very practical collective bargaining power that, quite frankly, no longer exists anymore. The individual worker was told they would be more empowered by leaving these groups and advocating for themselves. But that bargaining, that negotiation immediately eroded. And I mean, I'm actually not old enough to understand what happened, or maybe it's just because I didn't work in like corporate or other industries where unions were stronger. But the benefits employees used to expect with jobs are available to less than 62% of employees working in corporate sector now. So that means nearly a quarter of at least American workers don't even have access to the benefits. So they're essentially doing contract work in an employee structure. And I mean, I've had this conversation with a ton of business owners where they expect workers to just show up every day in and day out, despite there being no paid time off or no sick leave. In some instances, employees have been asked to pay their own state and federal taxes out of their paychecks, which we'd put some stop guards in place during 2020 when many people were furloughed and then hired back on as contractors. But they're just not being, well, actually what's happened is that large employers have found loopholes now with new benefit software applications. And so they're offering, choice to employees who don't have the wherewithal to be able to manage their own benefit packages. And so the choice simply becomes, this like sort of burnout, overwhelm. It's not apathy. It's like indecision and no benefits get put in place. And then that's the employee's fault. In 2024, a study done by KFF found that average employer-sponsored family health premiums were over $6,000 a year being taken out of employees' paychecks. That's supposed to be your benefit that you're now paying for. So this whole fucking concept, I don't think a lot of people are fact checking, because even I am still getting grilled by my friends and family about my level of security because I've been self-employed for my entire adult life. Whomever told us that our security comes from our jobs was lying. And it might not have started out like that, but that's what I mean. No one's fact checking anymore. The system says your job is your security because the system needs you to keep working for it. And when we release the burden of justifying what feels like a wildly extractive and disempowering experience for most of us, it clears up the space to finally go, wait a second. What's wrong with this? Why, despite my doing everything right, does it feel so wrong? This isn't about making enough anymore. This isn't about being prepared anymore. What we get to explore together is how to feel psychologically resourced despite our own fragility. A lot of what we were sold as security is just compliance. The regular paycheck didn't just give you income. It was a repetitive patterning, a habit that got formed that taught you that being predictable is good, that repetition is ethical, that routine is virtuous. And if you stay inside your lane, if you stay inside the lines, if you color inside the lines long enough, this benevolent structure will hold you. But structures aren't benevolent. Systems are designed. And so for most of our industrialized workforce, and more recently our technological workforce, these structures were designed around a very brutal reality. Your labor in exchange for predictability, not success, not pay, patterning. And this is where Milton Friedman, and I talk a lot more about all of these different kind of management. If you got your MBA, you'd study all these old guys. But it was their logic in terms of how can you create a more efficient workforce that like got us all here. So shareholder primacy shaped decades of corporate thinking by insisting that the business exists first to maximize profits. And no matter how you dress it up, the downstream effect is clear. People become the cost centers. So the rub is if you make workers feel more secure, then they will show up. Not if you make them feel more resilient or more grateful. This is a problem and a solution. Profits versus people. People versus profits, I guess, in that particular metaphor. But you get what I'm trying to say. The other outcome of this exchange is that wealth concentrated like crazy. In 2025, it was reported that the top 10% of households by wealth held nearly 70% of total household wealth, and the bottom 50% held less than 2.5%. We all know this. We all know that this economy is not fair. The structure isn't fair. So why do we keep acting like if we just do our jobs, we'll get what we want, which is security? Why do we want wealth? This isn't about just work harder or be more prepared. That's where the blame comes in. That's how they've tricked us. If you want historical proof that labor market pain does not just quote unquote work itself out, the NBER's work on the China shock found that adjustment in affected labor markets was remarkably slow. Depressed wages and labor force participation persisting decades, along with greater job churning and reduced lifetime income for exposed workers. This isn't just temporary instability if we keep following their rules. This is generations of people being told to just work harder, save more, and you'll be safe despite the sinkhole we're all fucking building on. So I want to eliminate this theory that like it's just unstable right now. I think we are moving into, and I would even argue it's always been unstable. But like, the veil has been lifted, the curtain has been pulled back. And hopefully what we understand now is the predictability that came from jobs was a fucking lie to get you to show up for your job. And not because of the paycheck. It's because the way that makes you feel. And that's why this is an inside job. And that's why you can't just build another business with a whole bunch of employees, paying them twice a month or once a month, and just expect this exchange. The paycheck is what eroded our bargaining power. It's what justified healthcare becoming unaffordable. It's why we have, I forget the specific numbers, but like most Americans don't have a retirement because this paycheck became our be all and end all. And so many of these things that we think should be our reward literally don't exist because of the exchange we were willing to make because we bought the lies that they told us in order to keep showing up. Whew. I'm stressed out just thinking about it. And it's that stress that's so expensive, right? We all know that nothing's been more insecure than work and jobs, and not even just your job title or your potential organization, but like, will your industry even exist in 5 years? Again, that reality has always, what's the word I'm looking for? Has been pervasive my entire life. But my ability, my capacity to hold that uncertainty and be okay anyway was mitigated by this concept of, well, if I just have enough ... then ... And all of that got taken away over the last few years. Human beings do not just chase resources. We chase signals, signals of belonging, signals of continuity, signals that tomorrow can be better than today, and signals that this illusion we've all perpetuated will be maintained by this collective belief system. And so I'm not shaming anybody for having a job, and I'm sure shit not blaming you for feeling resourced by a predictable paycheck. What I'm asking for you to do is explore why you think you believed that in the first place. Because if it were true, you would feel secure right now. Even if you didn't have any money, especially if you didn't have any money. When we refuse to call predictability protection, when we refuse to blame ourselves for our dependence on security, and when we recognize that the only medicine for our anxiety is our own internal sense of peace, we can break the paradigms that have put us here. And we can stop building our lives around these false gods. So we're in this really unique space where we can stop optimizing, because whatever efficiencies we were building for the old way, the old world. Everything feels so disruptive and insecure right now because we are in between. We're in the liminal space of what was old and doesn't work and is broken, and what is being created, and what is uncertain and therefore imaginative. A friend of mine kind of spawned this whole contemplation yesterday when I asked him, how he was doing. And he said, to be honest, I don't know how to answer that question. And I said, oh, is there anything you'd want to talk about? And he said, oh, absolutely not. This adventure is proving to be the most inspired to date. And if I knew what were going to happen, I would be bored absolutely silly. I would go back to my Zen head scratching and meanderings and musings. And it reminded me the fun really is in the unknown. The creativity is at that knife's edge of space and uncertainty. It's incredibly uncomfortable. It's acute. It's sharp. It's what allows me to feel alive. So what I'm asking is for you to look at the difference between predictable and protected. What we want is to feel protected. And in this need for belonging, participating, contributing, creating, how do we feel safe first, to contribute second, and find our own sovereignty third, knowing that we can take care of ourselves despite whatever happens. Here's a different way of asking that. If everything disappeared tomorrow, what parts of you would remain? If things got more expensive, more conditional, more volatile, what would still hold you? What do you actually trust? I don't think any of us are trapped in predictability, but I do think we take for granted what is familiar, and we might even seek that out. I've noticed it feels like a very unique relationship with time because it doesn't seem like anybody else operates in the same way that I do. And I'll notice these minutes ticking down. And I prepare myself to be disappointed. I prepare myself for that person to not get it done. Not once. I mean, this is just in the last week I've been hyper in tune with this because I just haven't had the capacity to actually swoop in and, quote unquote, save people. But it's also this understanding, like, that's not the relationship I'm trying to build. When we talk about Power 3.0, last week's episode, it's like, can I just trust that you're going to work this out exactly the way you need to work it out? And it's going to look different than me, probably going to be timed differently than me. And if there is a problem, I can actually wait for that instead of anticipating it and then trying to circumnavigate it and blah, blah, blah. Anxiety might not be pathological. At least mine isn't. I'm wondering if it's that my nervous system is refusing to consign to a lie about my reality. There were no fucking problems that didn't get solved all on their own. There were inconveniences. There were temporary setbacks, but like in this very moment, all of the things that I perceived as being a problem they don't exist anymore 7 days later. So what, BZ, right? Why the fuck did you write this book? This all has to evolve. And I can't change the world, but I can play with this on my own. And then I can share my learnings with you. Security is not the absence of change. It's the capacity to meet change without total self-abandonment. No longer am I willing to consign to the lie. No longer am I willing to feel like shit about something that I think will help me feel secure. Security is the capacity to meet change without total self-abandonment. Security is not predictable. It is not external resources. It's not self-employment. Security isn't a number. Security is a relationship. Security is a relationship with uncertainty. Sure, money is a part of that. Of course it is. And how you resource yourself is up to you. I've learned much about my resourcing and my self-resourcing. If you listen to any of my old stuff, I've completely changed the way that I engage with finances. Like, completely changed. Because money alone does not produce my security any longer. And in fact, a lot more denial probably lived there and fragility as a result than I probably could have ever known had I not experienced what I've experienced, the uncertainty of the last few years. So the thing under the thing, the paycheck is just the surface level symptom. It's taken this terrifying world we've all lived in our whole lives and given us this repeating pattern we can touch and feel and see and sense and know. And that absolutely mattered. It even helped. It was soothing. I mean, I know when my money's coming in, and that is a relief. But it's not the same as securing. So stop relying on that which repeats. Start building this emergent, adaptive, asynchronous schematic to let you flow through your reality instead of 8-bit it. I know for me, nothing that I was ever told or the way that it should be or the way I should feel ever materialized in the way I had imagined. And I think that's been my real heartbreak, is not that I'm broken, but if you had told me like, this is how it would feel, I probably would have made some different choices. And also, like, I don't know that anything would have really changed in terms of outcomes. The awareness is useful, but I have to bring myself back to every single moment I make decisions in and then do my best to apply what I know now with the resources I have available in this moment to create that which I believe will yield the results that I seek. We all just want to feel better, not just predictable. So the first move is generally not be more disciplined, be more prepared. It's probably be real, be emotionally honest. If your version of security is making you numb, resentful, or more exhausted, and most importantly, if your version of security makes you less like yourself, it is absolutely time to look very deep into what life you want to build right now, right here, starting fresh, releasing the old way in this liminal space to start building a structure that will support you. I mean, you've heard me say it a million times. Like, can you build something that will support you even on your worst day? I'm just looking at my notes. A word that has been really trending right now is this concept of aliveness. This energy that trusts your own desire enough to move towards it for no other reason than it feels good. It feels real. It feels nurturing. What if those can be your metrics? What if that's all you have to do? And before you make a plan and start mapping out the rest of your 2026, just notice, is that coming from a place of soothing anxiety or true inspiration? Not every fear is dysfunction. Not every feeling is clinical. Sometimes we just need a minute. We just need that patience, right? And that tenderness to allow ourselves to move, like to just be with the experience. The pattern sedated us. The paycheck made promises it couldn't keep. And it's, kind of like what happens when we remove our emotional safety blanket, whether it's a glass of wine at night or, a gummy before a particularly stressful experience. And you have to just feel the feelings. Like, it's generally going to be uncomfortable. Doesn't mean that it's a problem. When you start to build out these structures to create predictability, I think it's one thing when we've never done something before and we're just trying to learn. But it's another when we're trying to dull our ability to create because we're making everything far too certain, far too known, far too predictable. And quite frankly, that's going to be like the way you play with that is your own. But I trust you know what I'm saying with that. It's funny. People ask me what my 2026 plans are, and it's to do a handstand. I have already done everything I wanted to do this year, and it's April. When it comes to like what I know I had set out as professional, personal, economic, all of those like goals, because I'm just very clear on what I want to feel and how I want to engage in my world. And when I live by, and by live by, I mean, I find that aliveness in every given moment. I let myself feel, is this real? Does this feel the way I want to feel right now? You kind of can't miss the mark. And that's my favorite intersection. When you stay real versus structural, when you stay relational instead of just practical, your experience becomes so much more rewarding and lush. The feedback is immediate. And that resourcing, that sense of security, that sense of predictability, you'll hear people say like, you have everything you need in this moment. That's what that means. It really is all here right now. But can you look for that? Like, can you see that? Can you feel that? And if not, it's not because you're doing something wrong. My thesis is it's everything you've been taught to believe just simply doesn't apply anymore. And so in this liminal space and this willingness to start new, you're studying a completely new thing. You wouldn't expect a first grader to be able to do what a 12th grader does. And wherever you are in life, you get this opportunity to be the fresh student right here, right now, because everything is changing so quickly. We are in this liminal space together. There will be plenty of challenges and setbacks. Believe me, my friend, you don't need to look for them. And it's the thing that you couldn't have prepared for despite your best efforts that will knock you sideways. So that's the work right now. That's your job. Your paycheck is your reward in this moment. Your security is the enoughness right here, right now. I have so much more to say on that, but I'm going to leave it because once again, I talked way longer than I thought I was going to. Next up, we're going to talk about Boss 3.0. And I've been teasing a lot of this. I mean, obviously I've been writing this book for the last year, so of course it's informed a lot of these episodes, but I'm hoping to kind of, I guess, solidify some of these concepts I've just been toying with over the last 20 years. Anywho, thank you for being here. I love you. I will talk to you in a week.